Hello. You're wet. I think you'd better all come inside. Yes, hello you delightful individuals, and welcome back to the wonderful world of thirst and vanity. I've been away. I have been away for a little while. I have not been able to post for a little while. First of all, I was ill. I was really, really ill. I don't know whether it was COVID or not, but I was horrifically ill, like bedridden, couldn't really do anything, desperately tried to get out of bed because I got so unbelievably bored, but at the same time really struggled to maintain any kind of cognitive focus on any specific thing. So thank you very much for your patience in that week. That was chaotic as hell. And then since then, I have been doing like back-to-back shows and events and prepping and decorating venues and organizing hotels and performers and all kinds of bits and pieces. Do you know what? It's always a chaotic October. October is like my busiest month of the entire year, but I love it. I love every second of it. And unfortunately, when it comes to like the YouTube and stuff like that, those events and bits and pieces, they all pay me more. So I have to go where, you know, the things that are going to pay my bills are going, you know. It's unfortunate. I have missed you. I had all of these things lined up and planned to be able to like show you and do all these YouTube videos, but I just didn't have the time. I didn't have the time to get it all sorted, unfortunately. But hopefully that is all majoritively done now. We've got like 1 week left of October, and I think everything's sorted. I think that's pretty much us all done now. Got a deep dive coming next week on the origins of Halloween over on Twitch, and then we're doing a bit of a Halloween party on Halloween itself. But other than that, I think we're back to like a normal sort of routine, or as normal as we can get when we're hedonistic deviants like we are, you know? The shows themselves have been absolutely fantastic. The events have been glorious. I've definitely been pulled into a last minute one, which was chaotic and exhausting, but so good, so unbelievably enriching. And I have to say that as a person, as an extrovert, and as a show extrovert, a showy person as well, having been back on stage, it's very much enriched my soul. I feel very good and wonderful in my little soul. I don't know, I like showing off. I like getting on stage and doing all the cabarets and bits and pieces. So it's really nice to go back and do, you know, and get back on stage and do all of the performances and stuff. It's just put me as a human being in a much better place, and I'm very thankful for that, you know. However, here we are back with a YouTube video. I was going to do something completely different this week, but I wanted to talk about the Rocky Horror Picture Show video game by Freakzone. Yes, my friends, about 3 weeks ago, I found out from my dear housemate, Chunk, many of you will know them, I found out from Chunk that the Rocky Horror Picture Show was being made into a video game. And my mind was melted. My mind was absolutely blown. Like, as soon as they mentioned it, I did a Google, I found a couple of articles on it, and immediately put it on my wish list. It looked fun, it looked exciting, and as an avid fan of the entire franchise, both the movie and the stage shows, like there was a lot of nostalgia, a lot of personal feelings involved in that. I like the Rocky Horror Picture Show more than I like the Alien universe, and you people know how much I enjoy the Alien universe, all right? So you are all too aware of what that means in regards to how I feel about this. It was very much a sculpting part of my very existence. Having seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show, it opened my eyes to the possibilities of self-expression, of sexuality, of gender, of all of these different dynamics, and not being holed into a box that cannot really contain you, you know? You were allowed to express yourself and be more than what society expected of you. And that was a very big part of my awakening to that, you know? After I found out about it, naturally, I immediately started asking other people who I knew were enthusiastic about the show, and nobody had heard of it. Nobody had heard of it. Like, of all of the people I spoke to, both in the community and people I spoke to online and friends and what have you, I think two other people had actually heard that they were making a new Rocky Horror Picture Show like video game, and I was shocked. I was genuinely shocked to find this out, because despite the fact that I found those little articles, there was no like active publicity about it. I expected more, hey, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, the big old wild, bizarre, peculiar cult classic that is the Rocky Horror Picture Show is being made into a video game. But I didn't really see anything. Like I said, a couple of articles, a couple of news articles in gamer magazines or online gamer websites, but nothing mind-blowing, nothing shouting it out, nobody really talking about it. And that shocked me. That genuinely shocked me. I thought maybe it's just past the times or what have you, but as somebody who grew up with it, and knowing what it means to generations younger than me as well, I was surprised, to say the least. Very much expected there to be more hype. However, regardless, I immediately put it on my wish list. And the day that it was released, which was Monday the 21st of October, I was notified by Steam that it had gone live and immediately bought it. Immediately purchased it. I was not missing that opportunity. It was on sale as well for like, I think it was $8.50 reduced to like $7.32 or something like that. Instantly purchased. I wasn't waiting. It was excellent. Do you know what I mean? Now, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, a lot of people think the Rocky Horror Picture Show was produced in the 1980s, but it wasn't. It was produced in 1975, or the movie was produced in 1975. If I remember correctly, it was a stage production briefly before that. Then they made the movie, and then it really became a proper stage production that toured all over the place. I know that it tours in the UK every 3 to 4 years, and I have seen the stage show an unreasonable amount of times. I've seen the stage show probably more than I've watched the movie, and I own the movie. So that should give you a kind of roundabout feeling about how many times I've been to the actual stage show. It's been sensational. One of the key factors of my personal hedonism is going and seeing the show, because I just love it that much. And yes, naturally, I love it to the point where I know all of the lines and know all of the characters. And for those people who may not be aware, at one stage I used to do a one-man Rocky Horror show. I literally did a 40-minute show where I sang all of the songs and played all of the characters. It was an interesting endeavor. It was good fun. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but good lord, was it exhausting, you know? Rocky Horror Picture Show was actually one of the very few movies that when Disney bought out Fox, it was one of the few movies that wasn't sent to the archives. There was this big thing where Disney bought Fox and they were like, cool, these are all your old movies that existed a long time ago. We'll put all of those in archive and we'll just move on forward with the new stuff, you know? But actually, Rocky Horror Picture Show was that much of a cult icon that it was one of the very, very few that didn't get put into the archive. Now, I know that the Rocky Horror Picture Show, obviously, as a brand, had other things that came out around it. If I remember correctly, in the 80s, there was an old like point-and-click computer game that was made around Rocky Horror Picture Show, and there was also a board game at some stage that was made around Rocky Horror Picture Show. I don't know much about them, but I knew that, I discovered recently, after finding out about this, that they existed, which surprised me, because again, I thought I would have heard about stuff like that. Although saying that, in the 80s, I think it was like 1986 that the original computer game came out, and I wasn't even born yet. So it makes sense that I wouldn't have heard about those things. But I thought I would have heard something about them since then, you know, especially since getting into computer games and stuff like that. And then, of course, there was the remake, which I have no interest in seeing ever.
Shiver with Antissa.
I watched the trailer and I can honestly say there wasn't a single thing about it that appealed to me. It just felt like money grabbing. It felt like they were taking another cult classic and desperately trying to milk it for all it was monetarily worth. That's what it felt to me. So I was just like, do you know what? I'm not going to watch this. And this was before I had this YouTube channel, so there was no incentive to go and watch it like I did with the Crow movie, for example. I feel like if it had been a different time, like if I'd have had the YouTube channel, I would have reacted to the trailer, and then I would have done exactly the same as what I did for The Crow, which is go and see it begrudgingly and then come back and give you my review. But as I didn't have it, I am fortunately saved from seeing that movie. I have no interest in seeing it at all, so I'm not gonna. It's nice and simple like that, you know? And now, of course, the latest thing the brand has released is this game. This game. Where do I begin? Okay. The Rocky Horror Picture Show video game that was released on Monday, the 21st of October. First things first, it's an 8-bit style game. It's an 8-bit style game. All of the little pixels, jumping around on platformers, all of that jazz. It very, very much lends itself to that retro sort of feeling. And given the fact that the movie was made in 1975, it makes sense to make it a retro style game, a retro style platformer game, you know? They also had 8-bit versions of all of the music from the movie, which I naturally sang along to throughout the entire game. They were such good dynamics and such good interpretation. Like, it was easily identifiable which parts of which songs they were repeating and what have you as the levels went on. I bloody loved it. I absolutely bloody loved it. It just went in and immediately all of the lyrics started coming out. It was so much fun. It was so much fun. They also then had variations of the music for certain levels where they sort of like slowed down the music and made it a little bit creepier. So it was still within the musical score, but it was like a variation to give it a little bit more atmosphere for specific levels, which I thought was very, very cool. As I mentioned, I sang along to some of the songs. What I didn't mention was the fact that me singing along to some of the songs meant that I wasn't concentrating on the game and therefore died a hell of a lot of the time because I was too engaged in singing along to the song itself. This is what happens when you're a big super fan of stuff like musicals and stuff. You get so carried away with some of the music that you are not even thinking about what it is that you're actually doing, you know? I also really enjoyed the fact that 90% of the lines in the game, like it was all just text that popped up on the screen with the digital pixelated face of the character, and it would pop up on screen, but all of the lines were like from the script, or 90% of the lines were from the script itself, which I naturally know pretty much off by heart, so I knew that they were there. And then the other 10% were either plot points, which they needed to progress the plot of the game and get it onto the next thing without a big musical number, because obviously the big musical numbers didn't have all the lyrics and stuff in there. Or they were like little jokes that I am pretty sure, but I can't guarantee, I'm pretty sure that they were jokes that came from the stage show. Like, there was a point where Dr. Scott turns around and makes a comment about being in Frankenfurter's back passage. And I can see it in my mind's eye. The idea of Dr. Scott going around the back of the stage and being like, oh, I'm in Frankenfurter's back passage. Like, little things like that were very much something to do with the stage show that were incorporated into the game and worked so perfectly. All the little jokes, all the little extras they seem to add in here that weren't in the movie seemed to be, like I said, either plot points or jokes that would fit perfectly with the stage show itself, you know? The level design itself was like a 2D platformer, obviously very, very pixelated, but like the old style 2D platformer game where you're jumping up, escaping traps and avoiding enemies, you know? Like, there were definitely points where I was expecting a certain level of timing with spikes raising up and lowering down, and I realized halfway through the game that the timing that I was visualizing was that of Sonic the Hedgehog from the old 2D platformer Sonic the Hedgehog games, and that's the reason why I kept dying on those spikes. I see you, devs. I know that you did that on purpose, you cheeky devils. But yeah, there was like loads of traps, loads of themed enemies, which was quite fun. I'll talk about them in a second. But the whole thing was really cool. It was great. Do you know what? It was genuinely challenging. It was genuinely challenging, but I never at one point felt infuriated by it. Like, even the bits where I died over and over and over and over again because nobody had any health. It was literally just like, you get hit, you lose your clothing, and suddenly you're in your underwear, and then you die. Like, it was very, very cool in that regard. I thought I absolutely pissed myself when I found out that the moment that you get hit as Brad Majors, you end up in your tighty whities. That was fantastic. But other than that, it wasn't like there was any extras, as it were, or any extra lives or anything like that. It was just you die, you die, you die, you die. And that wasn't a problem because the game itself was so enjoyable and so much fun that it didn't matter that you died because you just carried on to the next bit, you know? So yeah, it was genuinely challenging, but not infuriatingly so. I mentioned about the enemies in the game. Like, obviously you had the characters in the game, and I'll take a moment to talk about those. Like, the heroes that you play are Brad, Janet, and Dr. Scott. And the people you're fighting are, well, not even fighting. The people that are on the other side of things are obviously Frankenfurter, Riff Raff, Magenta, Columbia, Eddie, Rocky, the other characters in the movie. The other enemies inside the maps themselves, inside the levels themselves, were like B-movie cheesy 80s style villains, or not even villains, monsters is probably accurate. For example, there was like a floating brain with a pair of googly eyes on it, you know? The actual levels as well were based loosely around the idea of Frankenfurter's mansion, which made a lot of sense because there were actually points where you would repeat sections of level, like as different characters. Like, there was a point where you did a certain part as Brad Majors, and then you would go through it again as Janet Weiss, but they would add more traps or more enemies. So even though you were familiar with the level, the actual progression through the level was very different because of the addition of these traps and enemies, you know? It's a very new and interesting way to make the same level harder and more challenging despite the fact that you're familiar with it. And the bosses themselves were like the other characters in the movie, like Frankenfurter, like Rocky, and each of the boss fights was actually very, very similar, but they'd always add some little extra thing in there to make it just that little bit more challenging, including like time-based ones, but I won't tell you who that is because I don't want to spoil it for everybody, you know? They were just different enough to provide that challenge. But again, there wasn't a point that I felt infuriated by it. I just enjoyed the experience, you know? Then there was the attention to detail. Oh my lordy, the attention to detail. In an 8-bit game, it's hard to see things when it comes to attention to detail, but there were a few things that I noticed that I absolutely loved. I loved the little dynamic of them that just set it that little section above the rest, you know? For example, the skeletal enemies. I said there were various different enemies. There were skeletons wandering around, and the skeletons were wearing the spacesuits of the distant galaxy of Transylvania. That was really brilliant that they would have these enemies in these themed outfits of the movie. I mentioned earlier that the played characters were Brad, Janet, and Dr. Scott. And it made sense that they were the heroes, you know? But what actually makes more sense, as well as that, is the fact that it makes no sense for Frank, Riff Raff, Magenta, Columbia, etc. to be trying to avoid their own traps. They would already know where all the traps are. They would already know where all of the enemies are, or more specifically, the enemies would probably recognize them. So it makes sense not to play as any of the other characters. And there was a couple of people in the community who were saying, oh, it's a real shame you can't play Frank. It's a real shame that you can't play Riff Raff, etc. But it makes sense in regards to the story when you start thinking about it. And that's like a little detail that I really enjoyed, because it just logically makes sense. And then there was the most infuriating and yet one of the most joyous attentions to detail that I have seen in an 8-bit game, which is when you played as Dr. Scott. For those people not aware, Dr. Scott is in a wheelchair, and it was fantastic to see a character in a wheelchair as a hero in a game, first and foremost. Secondly, it was great to see that they could do all of the things that the other characters could do, which was, again, fantastic to see. But there was a little attention to detail, a couple of little attentions to detail when it came to Dr. Scott. First of all, when he picked something up like the other characters did, he held it over his head. But that didn't stop him having one hand on his wheels. So it wasn't like he was carrying something above his head and then the wheelchair would just automatically work. There was still that little attention to detail of holding something above your head while wheeling, because that's how a wheelchair works, you know? And the other attention to detail that happened with Dr. Scott and didn't happen with any of the other characters, and I bloody loved it, was the fact that Dr. Scott had a little bit of drift. There was a little bit of drift. So you would stop, but if you weren't careful with your stopping, your character would keep wheeling just a little bit. Just a tiny, tiny little bit, which was just enough to get me killed a hell of a lot of times. But it makes sense because he's in a wheelchair, and it was bloody brilliant to see. It was great. It was a nice little attention to detail that just made the game that little bit harder. Like, it's something that you wouldn't necessarily expect from an 8-bit game. But I loved it. I loved it. It made everything just that little bit harder and yet so much more enjoyable because you had to compensate for that. It was just, yeah, very good. I enjoyed that a lot. The full game itself only takes about 2 hours. It's only a very, very short computer game. But honestly, I think if it was any longer than 2 hours, it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have worked because they followed the movie very, very closely in regards to like the storyline and the plot points and what have you. And I feel like if they'd have gone any further than 2 hours, 2.5 hours maybe, they would have been shoehorning in random stuff in order to try and bulk out the game, and it would have just let the whole game down a little bit. I feel like even though it's a short game, I not only got my money's worth, but I would have actively paid that. Like, I am not upset that I paid my £7.32 or whatever it was for the 2 hours of gameplay. I fully feel like I would pay more than that. I'd pay £11-12 for the amount of enjoyment that I got out of playing this game. That's just me, but I genuinely enjoyed it that much. It was that level of genuine entertainment, full heartfelt entertainment, you know? But they covered everything. They covered the story, they had the key plot points, they had interesting level designs, they had interesting enemies, and there was nothing lost from the story, but there was also nothing like added into the story. There was also a few little gimmicks in there. There was a couple of little jokes that were made that I thought were absolutely hilarious because I have seen both the movie and the stage show. Like, do I want to say it? Yeah, I'll say it. Like the fact that Rocky speaks and Janet is shocked. Oh my God, you talk. And Rocky's like, actually, in most versions of the story, I do talk. It's just the movie that I don't. Like, breaks the fourth wall a little bit, but it's just so funny. So funny for those people that know the stage show and have seen the movie, you know? Honestly, mwah, brilliant. Love it. Loved it. So, my review. It was fucking phenomenal. Genuinely sensational. I paid just over £7 for it. I think it was, like I said, I think it was $8.50 on the Steam page, but they're having a promo at the moment where it's like 10% off or what have you, and I paid like $7.32 for it or something like that. Well worth it. Well worth it. Despite it being only a couple of hours long, I would pay that over and over because I just enjoyed it that much. It was just so much fun for a one-shot game. It was just great. I really enjoyed it. It very much carried the same atmosphere as the movies and the stage show, despite being 2D and in 8-bit and not being able to hear any of the voices or songs or what have you. You heard the music, but you didn't hear the songs. Speaking of that, I absolutely loved the music, and as I mentioned, was singing the whole way through it. It was so much fun. And on top of all of that, I actually really enjoyed the challenge of it. Like, bits were lasting longer than I was expecting because I was getting so wrapped up in what was going on. There were things that were timed that were just slightly off, and it was just very, very much enjoyable. The challenge, it didn't feel like I was breezing through the game. It very much felt like there was a challenge there. Like, it was challenging, but not infuriatingly so. I said it before, it was challenging, but not infuriatingly so, you know? And of course, the nostalgia hit so fucking hard. I was smiling through it. I was laughing through it. I was giggling inappropriately through through it. It was just great. It was just so much fun from start to finish. It was just great. Thoroughly enjoyed and thoroughly recommend. If you like the old movie, you like the stage show, and you've got a couple of hours to spend on a game, worth it. Couple of criticisms, I will say. One, there's no way to change the key bindings on your controllers, so there's a limitation on accessibility there. And the other thing that I would definitely want them to add, or get the developers to add, is volume control, because the volume was like, it's just one volume, and that volume was loud. I had to turn it down on my audio, but then that turned down all my alerts. It was very problematic and stuff. It was a pain in the backside, but other than that, it was sensational. Other than those two very small gripes, the whole thing was sensational and very much enjoyable, you know? So yeah, so that is the joys of the Rocky Horror Picture Show video game that came out, that should have been excessively more publicized, because it deserved to be more publicized, and that I recently completed and bloody loved. If you wanted to see that, the VOD is available, but more specifically, if you want to check me out playing other games, then check me out on twitch.tv/ValenVain. That's me. We play lots of different games, talk about sex education, do all the bits and pieces. You get to see me dressed up in a variety of different outfits. You know how it is. You can also check me out on TikTok, where I do whimsical facts about schmecks and other such tantalizing tidbits. Or you can check me out on Instagram, where you get to see like behind the stage stuff that I do. The shows and bits and pieces that I get up to tend to be all on Instagram. So if you are interested, please check out my variety of different social medias where I am most usually based in, you know? And of course, you beautiful beans, if you have enjoyed the video, I would love it if you press that cheeky little thumbs up button. And if you like this kind of stuff and you want to see more of it, then click that cheeky little subscribe button, you know? The classic sort of bits and pieces. I know this has been a relatively short one. As you can probably hear, I'm still quite bunged up with yet another illness. Fun. And of course, there's an awful lot to do because it's still October, but we're cracking on. However, you beautiful beings, I will hopefully be back next week with another video. Until then, don't do anything I wouldn't do. Because if I wouldn't do it, I'll fucking kill you.